Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the astrology of March 2025. We've got a lot going on in the sky, my friends. We are going to be breaking it down. We're going to be talking about new moons, full moons, eclipses, ingresses into new signs, a lot of action in Aries for the month of March. We have a few retrogrades with Venus and Mercury stationing retrograde. We've got Cazimis galore with Venus, Mercury, Neptune, Cazimi. Um, and then we have a bunch of void of course moons to talk about, which I think are pretty interesting, especially from a Hellenistic perspective. I'll break that all down for you in a second. And last but not least, Neptune's going to be ingressing into Aries. So lots to talk about. But if you're just joining me here today, make sure you drop me a comment here in the chat. Let me know where you're stopping in from. Just going to welcome a few friends here before we get started. We've got Heidi was stopping in from Melbourne. Says, I'm not going to be here on Saturday morning. I might be asleep. It's been a very hot week in Melbourne. Oh, Heidi, well, thank you for stopping in and checking in with us here today. It's interesting. It's been pretty cold and snowy here on the other side of the world, so just glad that you're doing okay, and I hope that you get the rest that you need, friend. Stephen the Jupiterian is here. How you doing, Stephen? Stopping in from overcast San Francisco, California. Hope you're doing well, my friend. Tarya is here. Happy Valentine's, says Tarya. Tarya is stopping in from Finland, I believe, one of our Finnish crew, so hope you're doing well over there in the evening by you, my friend. Rachel, hello from Ireland to all my friends. A bitterly cold Friday evening, but brighter skies and beautiful are always affirming the approach of spring. Yes, I'm getting the tingle of spring. I mean, we're getting kind of winter's striking back here. Winter's revenge, I guess, the last few days here in the Midwest of the United States. But I'm feeling some of the stirrings of spring. There are a few days here and there that remind me of the winter thaw. So I'm just glad that you're here with us today. All right, friends. So I am going to make a few announcements before we talk about the astrology of March 2025. First of all, if you are in need of assistance, you can go find me at spencermichaud.com. This is my website where I have all of my readings available. You can click on the Book Now button if you want to learn more about what the stars have in store for you. We've got a lot of changes going on, and sometimes that can be a little bit disorientating. So I'd be happy to help you make a plan to kind of contextualize what you're going through, to help understand what some of these changes might mean for you personally. So go find me at spencermichaud.com and book a reading. I also have a newsletter if you would like to stay up to date on what is going on as far as our live streams that we do here once a week usually, or classes that I have on offer, or if you'd like to get a 10% discount on any of those aforementioned readings, subscribe to the newsletter. It's in the description of this video or wherever you are consuming this podcast today. It's a great way to stay in touch and a great way to keep up to date with everything. So I hope that you'll do that. I also have a beautiful partner, Tanya Andrews, who has a magically adjacent business called Third Coast Mojo. And today is Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day, everyone. And for Valentine's Day, she has a special offering. It's called Come to Me Oil. It is a Venus and Pisces election that is very great for attracting some of the things of your heart's desire. So go check her out on Etsy. She's got all sorts of great products, Venus, Mars, Saturn, the moon, the sun, all sorts of good stuff. So check that out if you need any astrological remediation or you want to just add a little magic into your life. And then finally, you can support the channel today by purchasing a super chat with the little $ in the chat on YouTube, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com. That really helps to support the channel, to keep the lights on, to help me purchase all the equipment and all of the software that goes into creating this broadcast every single week, and of course books and etc. And just keeping the lights on. This is my full-time job, so thank you so much for all of your support. All right, friends. So let's kind of get to it. Let's see. So I'm going to kind of go through some things, some big picture thoughts. And I'm going to then kind of start focusing in on some of the details as we go along. But some of the big picture thoughts that we have for the Astrology of March 2025 is it's eclipse season. We're going to be dealing with some eclipses in a full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo. We're going to have a new moon solar eclipse in Aries. Those are always big chapter markers. These are big shifts in consciousness, shifts in the narrative. A new story is going to be born, and there's some disorientating feelings that go along with that. Human beings are somewhat averse to change, and I think that we sometimes thrive when we know what's going to happen next. It doesn't always work that way. I mean, the only thing that we can actually count on is change. So coming to terms with it is a process. So that's going to be one of the things that we'll keep an eye on with March in particular. Of course, we mentioned Venus and Mercury are stationing retrograde. We've got Venus stationing retrograde on the 27th. Excuse me, no, not on the 27th, on the 1st of the month. And then we have Mercury stationing retrograde on the 15th. So I hope I said that correctly. Venus on the 1st, Mercury on the 15th. I'll break that down in depth for you as well, but just a lot of potential delays, a lot of revisioning, a lot of asking a lot of questions about our own independence, our sovereignty, our freedom, the way that we take charge, how we fit into the collective or how we don't fit into the collective. So some things to consider. Those two planets, Venus and Mercury, are also going to be renewed in the heart of the sun, which is called Cazimi. So this is where we're burning away all the dross from the old cycle, and we're infusing it with meaning. The sun is a great furnace that helps us to shine light on something in addition to heating things up, right, and burning away all the old experiences, all of the accumulations that we've had over the previous cycles. And this can just give us a real interesting awareness of what our next missions are going to be. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And then, as I mentioned, 4 Hellenistic void of course moons. That is a lot of void of course moons, friends. There are 2 different ways of calculating the void of course moon. And one way, a modern way, tends to make the moon void of course every few days or so. And this is where the void of course moon does not cross sign boundaries. Right, so where it's not making an aspect until it changes signs. Hellenistic void of course moons are actually much more rare. This is when the moon is not making an aspect within 30 degrees across sign boundaries. And generally, I usually only see this happen once every few months, like maybe once every 2 to 3 months. This month we have 4 of those periods, 4 void of course moons. And that is a period of time where things might not work out exactly how we are planning. The ancients said that nothing would come of the matter. So I think that there's going to be delays. I think there's going to be, destabilization as far as the changes that are happening, and also a lot of periods where we might feel extraordinarily disorientated. It's a lot to process. I mean, I'm going through this, the same as all of you out there. There's a lot going on right now, a lot to process emotionally, a lot to process just with our physical reality changing. And this month ahead is going to be no different. So we'll try to put it in the best possible light that we can as far as how we can deal with those things while still maintaining our center, but not maybe avoiding the changes that need to take place, or not avoiding the challenges that we have to rise to. And then finally, there's one other thing, 2 more things, big picture wise. The sun's going to be in malefic enclosure in a period of time between the 8th and the 12th of March. We'll break that down in detail, but this is a time period where we might feel difficulty shining our light, or finding vision or focus, or finding kind of the sense of purpose, especially when we have the planets Mars and Saturn making a difficult aspect to the sun. So I'll break that down for you. And then we'll spend some time with Neptune and Aries at the end of the month. This happens at the very end of the month. We'll try to contextualize this a little bit with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's going to be happening later in the year. I'll just give you dates for all of this. We'll talk about some other times in history when Neptune has been in Aries. I think the last time was in the 1860s, and that was a difficult time, especially in America's history. So we will try to contextualize that without without diving too deep into the fear hole, I guess you could say, uh, there are some uncomfortable truths that we have to acknowledge and that we have to accept about some of the past times in history when this placement was active. But I think we'll try to figure it out in the best way that we can together. So those are our big picture thoughts. Uh, so here, let's now focus in on kind of that medium range view, right? So here are the lunations that we have for the month of March. On March 6th, we have a first quarter moon at 16 degrees of Gemini. So this is going to be a square between the Pisces sun and the Gemini moon, second decan of each of those signs. Second decan of Gemini tends to create ambiguities. It's a Mars-ruled decan. It's one where we're kind of having difficulty reconciling a lot of competing thoughts, a lot of competing perspectives. And the second decan of Pisces, where the sun is, it tends to be related to overestimating our abilities, trying to unify our vision and our reality and coming to terms and accepting that. So that first quarter sort of feels like a head versus a heart type of experience. On the 14th, we have a full moon lunar eclipse at 23 degrees of Virgo. So that's the Virgo moon opposite the Pisces sun. And this is a full moon lunar eclipse on the fixed star Alkes, which is related to legacies and passing on legacies. So we'll break that down in depth as we move forward. We have a last quarter moon at 2 degrees of Capricorn, squaring the newly ingressed sun into Aries. We'll talk about that. That might be releasing our some material attachments potentially. And then we have a new moon solar eclipse at 9 degrees of Aries on the 29th of March. So a big new moon solar eclipse in a sign that is related to beginnings, related to pioneering, related to new starts and severing and separating from something to create independence. We have ingresses, which is a fancy word for a planet moving into new signs. We have a number of those this month. We have Mercury moving into Aries on the 3rd of March. We have the sun moving into Aries on the 20th of March. That is our spring equinox. Venus is going to retrograde back into Pisces on the 27th of March. And then Mercury will follow suit, retrograding back into Pisces on the 29th. And then our big ingress for March is Neptune moving into Aries, which generally happens roughly once every 14 years. Neptune ingressing into a new sign. The synodic cycle for Neptune is generally around 165 years, so we haven't seen a Neptune in Aries transit for about 165 years. So we'll try to contextualize that for you and try to break it down. Solar phases for the month. So our solar phases are the relationship of the planet to the sun and its synodic cycle. Solar phases include retrograde stations, direct stations, entering or exiting its shadow, and then of course the Cazimi placements. On March the 1st, we have Mercury entering its retrograde shadow at 26 degrees of Pisces. That same day, Venus stations retrograde at 10 degrees of Aries. On the 13th, Venus will retrograde under the beams of the sun, which is called a moment of phasis at 8 degrees of Aries. That can be sort of a destabilizing period for planets when they go under the beams of the sun, like a planet taking to its sickbed. So some challenging astrology for Venusian, significations for the month, especially with Venus in her exile. On the 14th, Mercury is going to retrograde under the beams of the sun at 9 degrees of Aries. So both of those planets going under the beams at the same time. Again, some interesting messages that we might be receiving, whether through the collective or personally. And we're going to be seeing Mercury going through that same process of renewal that Venus is going to be going through. On the 15th, Mercury stations retrograde at 9 degrees of Aries. So oftentimes these planets will go under the beams of the sun, especially Mercury, very close to their retrograde station. So this is another one where we're going to be reviewing some things. We're going to be reviewing how we how we act out in the world and our independence. We're going to be reviewing how we are pioneering spirits. We're going to be reviewing leadership and how we take leadership and the leaders that we have right now as well. On the 19th of March, the sun comes together with Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces. So one last conjunction with the sun before it moves into Aries. On the 22nd, Venus is cazimi, retrograde, at 2 degrees of Aries. That's on the 22nd of March. And then Mercury goes through its cazimi at 4 degrees of Aries on the 24th. So this is called the inferior conjunction of both of these planets. They're both moving extremely slow during this period of time. So again, delays could be something that we're experiencing around March, especially with both of these planets moving at a snail's pace. Then we get to our out-of-bounds planets and VOC moons. Now, I talked a little bit about the VOC moons and what they mean as far as the Hellenistic version. Out-of-bounds planets are when a planet is outside of the normal declination path of the sun, which is sort of a fancy way of describing how high the sun or low it rises over the course of the year. And we have Mars continuing to be out of bounds outside the normal path of the sun. It started on December the 30th and goes all the way to April the 7th. So Mars has been out of bounds for quite some time. It's still retrograde as I'm recording this in mid-February. It will be stationing direct February 23rd, so that will at least be one hopeful improvement for Mars. But we are going to see Mars still moving through Cancer, its fall, out of bounds, which is sort of a rogue Mars. I mean, we've seen this in the collective, especially in North America right now, where there's just all sorts of, I guess, in my opinion, reckless cutting, severing, separating, just all sorts of those kind of martial threats and things of that nature. It's been a lot. It's been a lot to process. So that's going to continue on through March, but hopefully we'll get some respite from that at the beginning of April. The moon will be out of bounds from March the 4th to March the 10th, and then also again from the 19th to the 24th. Those are periods when we might feel a little bit overwhelmed by our feelings. Our bodies might not feel exactly how they normally would. Out of bounds planets generally are mavericks. They're acting outside of the normal, socially acceptable realms of the king, I guess you could say. Like if you think about the sun in traditional astrology, like the historical way that they looked at it, they considered the sun some kind of divine power or the king. And when we have planets that are out of bounds, they're acting outside the rules, outside the normal structures and socially acceptable rules of the local authorities, etc. Those void of course moons I was talking about, I'll just give you some dates. The 10th of March to the 13th, the 16th of March to the 18th, the 25th of March to the 27th, and then again from March 30th to April 1st. 4 Hellenistic void of course moon periods. I tend not to schedule important things during Hellenistic void of course moon periods. I know some people who try not to schedule things during the modern interpretation of void of course moons, but I think that to me feels slightly restrictive because it just happens so often that it's almost nearly impossible to avoid. But these void of course Hellenistic ones are, usually much more rare. So having 4 of these periods in a month is quite something, and we'll see how that works out. What I have noticed when we've had Hellenistic void of course moons in the past, I do a lot of cleaning during these periods of time. I just get rid of stuff. I've cleaned out my attic during these periods of time. Clean out the garage. Clean out a corner of your office that's messy. Like, I think that purging is actually a pretty good use of this energy. It's something that is low stakes, where you're not necessarily trying to manifest something, which is a lunar signification, bringing something into being, but you're actually just getting rid of something. You're organizing something. Maybe this is a great month for doing that in our personal lives. All right, so let me check back in with our chat here. Winter's here. What's up, Winter? Nice to see you. Says hi from New Jersey, everyone. Hope you're doing well, Winter, and having a wonderful Friday afternoon. Taku's here. Hello, everyone. Good evening from snowy Berlin. Nice to see you, Taku. Hope you're doing well, my friend. Jolie James says hello, everyone. Hello, Jolie. Thank you again for joining us here. Steven says, I was born with an out-of-bounds moon. You would think I'm a maverick, but I was never a rebel until later in life. Well, you never know when some of those things are going to ripen, you know? Jolie James says, I have an out-of-bounds Mercury. So we've got a few people with some out-of-bounds planets here. Steven says, purging is very good at this time, too. The South Node in Virgo helps with this. Yeah, I think that's a good observation, Steven. I think that one of the things I've been working on consciously with the South Node in Virgo is not necessarily purging my physical environment, although I could use some of that. I've been kind of trying to purge my anxieties, you know, the worries, the feelings of, I don't know, the fear that comes with an impending winter, I guess you could say, which I associate with Virgo. The kind of like the fear of trying to consolidate the harvest of summer and identify the flaws and identify the value that will help sustain us. I think that is a good thing to do during the South Node and Virgo periods of time, is how do we release our attachment to legacy on some level. This has been really instructive. I have Mars and Saturn in the third decan of Virgo, Stephen, and I did some reviewing of like some of my musical stylings the other day, like kind of old websites that had music on them, and just thought a lot about my musical and creative legacy, and just started releasing attachment to it. And like, there used to be a time back in when I was younger where I was very concerned about what I was passing on to the next generation or what I was preserving. And as I've gotten older, that has become less important. Not that I don't want to pass on good things to future generations, but more so, it's not about preserving the self, if that makes sense. I want to pass on a beautiful world, a functional world. I want to pass on knowledge, but I don't necessarily have to pass, it doesn't have to pass through me specifically, if that makes sense. So I think feeling those feelings is in that everything kind of, you know, returns to the oceanic sea on some level, you know, like Jimi Hendrix was saying, like castles made of sand fall into the sea eventually, right? Like we're all just building castles of sand on these beaches, and eventually the tide's going to come in and whatever was us is going to dissolve and return back to a collective consciousness or a collective spirit. And there's just some real liberation in that, you know, in kind of the dissolving of, I guess, what you might call ego or something of that nature. Karen is here. What's up, Karen? Kia ora. Kia ora to you as well, my friend. Hope you're doing well over there in New Zealand. And yeah, it's really nice to see you here in the chat. Karen, are you active in the Indigenous community in New Zealand? I've kind of, I think you friended me on Instagram, and I saw some really, really interesting, you know, events that you were either participating in or leading. So yeah, let me know what kind of connections you have over there to those kind of cultures, because it's always fascinating to me. I'm doing a lot of study of Indigenous cultures, not only in America, but I've done some study with them in Australia via a book called Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta, and I'm always curious to hear an Indigenous worldview. Okay. All right, friends. So thank you so much for putting all these beautiful comments in here. I'm going to start diving into it, or I'm going to be here for 4 or 5 hours. I'm going to try to get this in about 3 hours. But I'm going to have to keep kind of rolling along if we're going to get to everything. There's a lot of astrology to discuss. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss with you is the first 10 days or so, the sun moving through Pisces 2. So what we should do first, let's share our screen, and then let's kind of take a look at what we are dealing with here. Oops. Oh, what's going on here? That's not what I wanted to do. Let's share something else. Mercury's in Pisces today, the first day of that. So it is interesting to wonder why this isn't. Oops. Hold on a second. 1 second. Karen says, I am part Maori. I am a teacher of traditional Maori weaving. That's awesome, Karen. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for keeping those traditional practices alive. That's really important. Speaking of legacies, that's something that, being able to pass on that knowledge and that wisdom that comes from many, many centuries and many ancestors is really important work. And I commend you for doing that. And we'll have to talk more. I'm more curious. I'm curious about the Maori worldview. I think it's really beautiful to be able to connect to the earth as a spiritual being rather than just as something to be exploited. And that's something that's really important to me as far as connecting with my own legacy that I'd like to pass on. All right, let's see if I can get this to work here. Oh, did that work? Aha! Okay, there we go. Oh man, all right. That's good. That's much better. Okay, sorry friends. I have apologized from the bottom of my heart. Mercury was giving us a little bit of a difficult beginning here, but we will persevere. All right, so what we're looking at here at the beginning of March is we are looking at the sun in the second decan of Pisces, 11 degrees Pisces, and it is under the beams of the sun. Saturn is under the beams of the sun is what I'm trying to spit out. So you can see Saturn is within 15 degrees of the sun. We're going to start off the month with a destabilizing type of experience where Saturn under the beams tends to dissolve the types of structures that we normally would come to rely on. And Saturn itself is going into this kind of, renewal process. And it can feel very disorientating. It can feel very much like the whole world is coming crashing down and all of our structures are being dissolved. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not. It's hard to judge in the moment. Again, I tell a lot of stories about waiting for events to unfold over a greater narrative before we're able to judge if they're quote unquote good or bad. So that's one thing to see about this chart. We have Mercury applying to a conjunction with Neptune. So again, the month is going to be starting off with a very almost, it's ethereal, but it's also not linear or tangible. Mercury, as you've seen today, it brings about trouble with tech issues, number one, as we experienced in real time. But it doesn't allow us to do things in a preconceived manner. It allows for flexibility. It allows for an artistic, figurative type of language rather than a practical one. And that is even more expanded or accentuated with the conjunction with Neptune, a planet that is also known for dissolving things. You can see that Venus is also in Aries. It's exile, getting ready to station retrograde. So we'll break that down in a second. Mars is newly stationed direct in the beginning of March. It's not as I'm recording this, but it will be in the beginning of March. And then Jupiter is direct in Gemini 2. The kind of thing that we start off the month with is Jupiter squaring the sun and feeling like there's just too much. This is definitely happening already, even though we aren't necessarily even in the Piscean waters yet. We just have this stream of information, this stream of pathways that we could take, but also just noise. And how do we filter that out? How do we kind of learn to focus within that noise? It's a good question that I don't have an excellent answer to yet. But my attempts to stay centered have been through pace and trying to absorb a little bit at a time without trying to take it all in all at once. Corey is here. What's up, Corey? It says, Corey, Chris and I are both home from work today, tuning in from Iowa City. Hope all's well with you and Tanya and your Roundup trigger happy neighbors in Michigan. Yeah. That has multiple connotations, but I think you're talking about the glyphosate, right? Like, yeah, I think we're figuring things out. I guess what I will say just about the neighbors in the neighborhood right now is I've been enjoying using my snowblower. I have got a new snowblower that is battery powered, which is very quiet and very effective. And we've gotten some snow here, and that's the most mundane kind of thing I can report. But yes, hopefully we have had a good conversation with the neighbors so that they aren't spraying toxic chemicals into our yards. Heather says, Mercury in Pisces, tech issues. Yes, you can see it. Just read a tourist photographer had both hands bitten off by a shark. Oh my goodness. Mercury in Pisces. That sounds like a Mars Mercury in Pisces type of experience. Well, hopefully, Heather, there are no sharks waiting for us here today to bite my hands off while I'm doing my recording. The closest thing that I might have to that is my cats, but they're in the other room right now. But we did get a little bit of a sort of a tech challenge for sure. Corey says, I too struggle with Pisces transits. Yeah. I as a Virgo stellium person who has systems for doing things, when Mercury's in Pisces, a lot of that just goes out the window. So you have to kind of make adjustments and go with the flow. Steven says, the other day a whale almost ate a guy on a kayak. So the attacks of the depths in the deeps on some level. So interesting. Heather says, yes, the Saturn in Pisces trine to an out of bounds retrograde Mars in Cancer is definitely a bitey fish. Yeah, I could see that. Okay, well, interesting diversions, friends. So the Sun in Pisces too. Let's take a look, if my technology will cooperate, at what we might be dealing with the Sun in Pisces too. So here is a slide from the Decans of Pisces webinar. And you can see here we've got the Nine of Cups. And the Nine of Cups in Book T is called the Lord of Material Happiness. Book of Thoth calls it the Lord of Happiness. Austin Coppock calls it the Net, which is a reference to the Indra's net. And this is something where we are trying to harmonize our inner dream, our inner world, our inner aspiration with our outer lived reality. So the power of our intention, wishful thinking, shaping our world before manifestation. All the nines in the tarot have something to do with a sephira called Yesod, which is a Kabbalistic tree of life sephira that is related to a birth canal. It's where all of these energies are kind of descending into manifestation. And this is the place right before the manifestation into a sephira called Malkuth. Malkuth is the real manifested version of it. Yesod is like, it's like that moment right before, like the labor pains. So how do we come to terms and come into alignment with our dream before manifestation might be something that we're experiencing as a collective when the Sun's in Pisces too. Pisces 1, for those of you who didn't watch the last monthly live stream or need a refresher, Pisces 1 is sort of about leaving behind material success in search of a higher purpose or meaning. So we have this dissatisfaction in the Saturn-ruled decan of Pisces 1. And then we start to come into alignment with what our true meaning and purpose might be in Pisces 2, potentially. And we're trying to come to terms with and surrender to finding a place of satisfaction. You can see here the figure, his arms folded, kind of in the satisfied pose. He has all these cups behind him. And he has dissolved the boundaries between worlds and dimensions, potentially. There's a lot of themes in this decan about flowing with the Tao, interconnectedness. But also there are themes of naive optimism, of overestimating abilities. I've talked much on this channel of the stories of Phaethon and of Dolos. They were two apprentices, one of Helios, the sun, and the other of Prometheus. And they both tried to imitate their teachers or their fathers, etc., and failed to do so. And there was challenges with that. So we may have to be careful of overconfidence with the sun in Pisces too. So questions you can ask yourself between the 1st of March and the 10th. What vision are you trying to manifest? Getting clear, shining light on what your actual dream and vision is the first step to actually manifesting it. How can you close the gap between the dream and its form? This is important. We talked about Ira Glass on this channel quite a bit. Ira Glass from This American Life. Ira Glass is a podcast host, and he talks about creativity, and he talks about the gap between your taste and your ability. And sometimes that's really frustrating. And he says the way that to close that gap is just to do a lot of work. Now, what does that mean when we close the gap between our dream and its form? Sometimes we have to try things. Sometimes we have to experiment with things. And then the more feedback we get from the manifestations that we are able to bring into being, the more we get clear as to what is possible and what isn't. Where would faith... so let's back up for a second. Can you make a wish and then release the how? This is important, especially for all Pisces significations. Virgo is very much about the detailed how, okay? The systems that go into place to help you deliver a message, deliver a result. Pisces says, can you come into alignment with the purpose behind that system without attachment to the system itself? And that's, I think, a really important lesson as we are moving through the dissolving of systems that we have held dear for a long period of time, especially in America. We're seeing the delusion, or the dissolving of many government systems. And how do we as people carry on the spirit of the most idealized version of that, I guess you could say? I know that in practice, we can have all sorts of criticism of America, its history, all of those types of things. And this is true for people internationally too. Like, this is true for all of the ideals that help us to create a society, right? One of the things that is, really important when we think about relationships, in social relationships, is our societies are oftentimes built on dreams. They're built on agreements. They're built on established norms that we will adhere to. When those things start to dissolve, when the actual physical structures of those things start to dissolve, how do we re-enchant the vision that got us to the place that we were at? Or do we need a new vision? I guess that's the other question that you could ask. If the vision wasn't fair, or if the vision didn't include everybody, how do we craft a new vision that does? So these are important questions to ask. I think that you can start doing that by just kind of talking about your vision with your friends and family, and not necessarily from a place of defensiveness or anger. I have thought a lot about, especially with breaking down a lot of the coming Aries placements, Neptune in Aries, Uranus in Gemini, etc., and what that meant historically for the world. I've thought a lot about how we come together rather than become more divided. And I think a lot of it's just through talking about what what we would hope for each other and for ourselves. And I say this not from a place of what we don't want. What do we want, right? It's very easy to cast a negative shadow on others and to displace our anger onto the more vulnerable or to create scapegoats. But that's not the way to create harmony. The way to create harmony is to talk about what it is that you would love to manifest. And when you talk about what you would like to bring into your life, then you can have creative solutions that don't necessarily other more vulnerable people than yourself. So a conversation I think that is worth having, especially during Pisces season, so that maybe we can avert some of the more extreme negative manifestations of placements like Neptune in Aries, Saturn conjoining Neptune in Aries, Uranus and Gemini. Uranus and Gemini is a hot button topic for America because that's Uranus is in Gemini is America's Uranus placement, and there's been a lot of conflicts that have happened during Uranian periods in American history, and especially with Neptune in Aries as well. So how do we understand that that's coming and start doing the hard work now of having those tough discussions with one another from a place of giving each other the benefit of the doubt rather than coming from a place of separatism? So when we're back to Pisces, where can you use faith to help you flow with the currents of your life? And I don't necessarily mean from an orthodox religious system, although if that is the thing that helps you to connect with the divine, I'm not one to say that that is wrong or that is, if it's helpful for you in helping to see the unity between all of us, then more power to you. But how could faith, just in a general term, faith in the ways that we are able to believe in a future that doesn't necessarily exist yet. Okay, like that's the important part. It might not exist, but we have to have faith that we can bring it about. And these are some of the things we might be discussing during Pisces 2 as well. What compromises are necessary to find acceptance and satisfaction? This is important. This decan of Pisces has to do a lot with not necessarily continuing to work something to death, right? Not continuing to refine something. It says, this is good enough, let's move forward. So where can you find that type of energy in your life? This is good enough, let's move forward. And then finally, how can you align with fate to prosper? Sometimes we have a vision of how our lives are supposed to go, of how our futures were supposed to turn out, of how our dreams were supposed to manifest, and then life has other plans. So we can do one of two things when life gives us a different plan. We can resist, we can go swim upstream and keep paddling against the current, and that may be necessary in some instances. That may be necessary. We may need to resist evil, I guess you could say, or resist people that are taking advantage of other people, or resist compromising our values or our ethics, especially if the collective isn't necessarily being good examples of those ethics. But I mean more about how can you come into alignment with the currents of your life and where your life is taking you. And that helps you to maintain some of your energy. If you're constantly resisting your life, if you're not coming to terms with your life, if you are hanging on to a vision that just isn't happening, that can lead to getting lost in delusion, etc. Sometimes what it means to come into alignment with the Tao and with your life is accepting that what you thought was going to happen isn't necessarily going to happen and making adjustments. Sometimes the Tao of your life causes you to need to band together with others to create change. Like that might be where the Tao of your life is leading you. So it's a very ephemeral type of thing. It's something that, coming to terms and accepting where we're at in our lives is not always very easy, but it's a very important part of the Piscean journey. Okay, so let's go back to our chart and let's kind of break it down, this period of time between the 1st and the 10th. And yes, Stephen is saying, don't forget to hit the like button. I would appreciate that, friends. Sorry for the technical difficulties in the beginning of the broadcast. But yes, I very much appreciate all of you here today. So we're starting off the month with Mercury conjoining the North Node and Neptune, and Venus stationing retrograde at 10 degrees of Aries. So multiple things happening in the first few days of the month. So here is this big stack up with Mercury, Neptune, and the North Node. And then here is Venus getting ready to station retrograde. Okay, we'll get rid of that here. There's one, there's two. So Mercury enters its retrograde shadow, conjoins the North Node, and is applying to Neptune. Let's talk about that piece of it first. Mercury in Neptune and the North Node are all in the decan of Pisces that is related to sacrifice and related to understanding what we need to do to achieve the dream. Yes, you may have come into contact with the dream in Pisces too, but then you have to take action on that, which is a Martial signification. This is a Mars-ruled decan. Pisces 2 is a Jupiter-ruled face in a Jupiter-ruled sign. It's very Jupiterian, okay? But now here we have Mercury and Neptune hanging out in a place that says, what are you willing to do to achieve that dream? It may be confusing. I think that the one of the hallmarks of Mercury, especially around this degree, okay, it's very close to the maximum degree of exaltation of Venus, but it's very idealistic. It's a very idealistic Mercury when it's conjoining Neptune and the North Node. This decan also can speak to wild swings of emotion. We can swing from the heights of ecstasy to the depths of despair. And there is a spirit in this decan called Elpis, or hope. So we're trying very hard to deal with how to maintain hope in the face of tidal waves of change, tidal waves of difficulties, etc. And I think it's very important to think, to slow down and to figure out how to make sure that you're checking details. This is one of the times of year where people in America start to do things like their taxes, etc. Mercury is often in Pisces around tax season, and that can lead to a lot of confusion. It can lead to a lot of overwhelm, and it's just very important to check things twice around this period of time, especially as Mercury is getting ready to retrograde itself. Now let's switch gears over to the Venus retrograde at 10 degrees of Aries. So this is a period of time where Venus is going to be starting to go under the beams of the sun shortly after this retrograde station. We're already in a period of time, as I'm recording this, with Venus in Aries, where we may be more attracted to independence. We may see the glamorization of independence. We'll talk more about this with Neptune in Aries. But just this kind of like glorifying, doing it on your own, without the help of others, which is kind of an illusion in itself. I've often had conversations with people and sometimes with family members who are trying to prove that they could do something by themselves, and not realizing all the support that had come around over many, many years in their life. I had this conversation with my daughter recently, and I think that as a native with Mars and Aries, she has an idealization of being able to do things on her own, which is very important. And I'm not saying that it isn't important to do things on your own, but being able to recognize the support that you've received from from family, from your society, etc. Those things can be very important, and the interconnectedness that we have with one another. And I think that what Venus is doing here is it's helping us to review how we might view our individuality, how we might view ourselves as individual points of light within a collective consciousness. It's not an easy placement. We might be a little bit impulsive with Venus and Aries as well. We might act on our desires before we have really time to think it through. And then with this retrograde, sometimes we are saying, oh man, I really was impulsive about this relationship or this purchase or whatever. And this is a time to review that. I would say this decan of Aries is very concerned with royal decrees. So there may have been some royal decrees that have been happening collectively lately that are being walked back. I know in my country of America, there's been a lot of executive orders that have been signed in the first month or two of the new presidency, and there's lots of challenges to those executive orders in court. So there could be a lot of legal challenges that we see at the beginning of the month that take the spotlight as well. So a couple dates to keep in mind for the cycle of Venus, the retrograde cycle. It's going to station retrograde on the 1st. It's going to go under the beams of the sun on the 13th at 8 degrees of Aries. It is going to be cazimi of the sun on the 22nd at 2 degrees of Aries. It's going to emerge as the morning star on April the 1st. Okay, that's at 27 degrees of Pisces. It'll station direct on April the 12th at 24 degrees Pisces, conjoining Saturn. And then it'll move back into Aries again on the 30th of April, and then finally exit its retrograde shadow on May the 16th. So whatever story that we have around this retrograde cycle is going to be playing out until mid-May. So just something to keep in mind. What's up, Tom? Nice to see you. Hope you're doing well, friend. Oh, so this is Stephen's solar return chart. Well, happy solar return, Stephen. This would be an interesting one for you for sure. Okay, let's keep going. So on the first, we had the Mercury conjoining the North Node and Venus stationing retrograde. On the second, let's move it forward here. On the second, we have Mercury conjoining Neptune and the Sun squaring Jupiter. So we alluded to the Sun-Jupiter square earlier. We broke down Pisces 2 as potentially trying to bridge the gap between our dream and our manifested reality, being careful not to have too much naive optimism about what can be manifested. And then we have the Sun in that decan squaring Jupiter in Gemini 2. Gemini 2 shows you a tarot card related to the Nine of Swords that is showing us a figure who is lying awake at night, head in hands, having sort of a nightmare or a panic attack at the end of the day. And Jupiter is expanding that feeling. It's expanding the overwhelm of just too much. Too many ambiguities, too many things up in the air, etc. I think that this square between the Sun and Jupiter could be a point where we have too much of something, right? Too much information, maybe too much ambition, too much hope on some level. I don't think you can have too much hope, I guess, but sometimes you can when you're hoping for something or you're not dealing with reality as it is. That can be very difficult. So we may be overestimating our abilities quite a bit with the Sun squaring Jupiter. So be very careful of that, because Jupiter tends to expand the things that it touches. So you want to make sure that you aren't expanding your ego or expanding your vision of what is possible based on the skills that you currently have. On the 3rd, we have Mercury ingressing into Aries. So you can see this here, Mercury moving into 0 degrees Aries here. So this is a little bit of a drying out point in the month. it's going to be pretty watery to start the month with the Sun, Saturn, North Node, Neptune, and Mercury. A lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, a lot of visioning and dreaming. And this is a point where we start to sober up a little bit, where, it dries out some of those feelings and emotions. Our communications maybe start to become much more direct instead of ambiguous. We be less inclined to skirt around an issue and more inclined to demand something based on our own subjective desire. But be very careful about making either demands or decrees, because Mercury is also going to be stationing retrograde, and you might have to walk back some of that bravado if you lean too heavily into it. Yes, Stephen says, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you are my only hope. We could use an Obi-Wan Kenobi right now, couldn't we, Stephen? So the other thing to consider with Mercury moving into Aries is its host changes. So instead of being hosted by an exiled Jupiter in Gemini, it is now going to be hosted by a fallen Mars in Cancer. So I think with Mercury moving through Pisces, hosted by an exiled Jupiter, we just kind of want to, there's a feeling of wanting to check out because we're feeling overwhelmed. Too much information, too many changes happening, too many things to keep straight. When Mercury moves into Aries, hosted by this Mars, we may be getting angry, but especially we might be getting angry because of feelings of a threat to our security, a threat to our family, a threat to the things that keep us feeling safe. And we might be starting to communicate and speaking out about those things. I think that is the shift that I see with that. It's less about information overload and more necessarily about feeling a little bit spicy because we might be losing some of the things that are important to us. I think that we're seeing cuts to peripheral programs right now in the United States. The whole, I like to call it doggies going in and making these cuts to these peripheral systems and programs that are important to people, but are not as central to people's lives as some of the other important programs that may potentially be on the chopping block. I'm talking about things like Medicaid, Medicare, etc. And if those things start to go away, that's when people start to get probably much more vocal about the things that are happening. Not to say that people aren't vocal right now. There's plenty of reasons to be vocal about the stuff that's going on right now. But I think that if people's personal security starts to be threatened from like some of those types of programs, you will see, I think, a much bigger uprising than we are currently experiencing. Okay. So when we get to the 4th, we do have our first out of bounds period for the moon. So the moon will be out of bounds as it's applying to Uranus here. That's going to be out of bounds until the 10th, so the 4th through the 10th. And on the 5th, we have a sextile between Mercury and Pluto. You can see this here. Okay, 3 degrees of Aries and 3 degrees of Aquarius. I do think that this is an interesting time period. Like right after Mercury ingresses into Aries, it's going to start making a positive connection with Pluto. I mean, I do think that this could be a real intensification of people's feelings and being able to verbalize their discontent with what is happening. And with Pluto, it's very much a collective action. So maybe there is a movement towards taking the initiative to go off into the fringe, right? Pluto in Aquarius talks a lot about bringing up issues related to like refugees, immigrants, things of that nature, being ostracized or like exiled. So this might be an action where there's more of that happening, or people are doing that willingly because they aren't agreeing with the centralized powers. Lauren is here. Happy Valentine's Day, world. My favorite holiday by far. Yeah, happy Valentine's Day to you, Lauren. You have to let me know why it's your favorite holiday. My love orchid bloomed behind me. I don't know if y'all can see it. It's blurry in the background, but this is an orchid that my partner and I think I bought it for her a number of years ago when we were first courting. And it blooms once every 2 or 3 years, and it's always kind of a nice thing because it's like, oh, look, our love is blooming again. So, yeah, it was a nice little moment. All right. So that gets us to the 6th of March, where we have our first quarter moon. So here is the square between the sun and the moon. The first quarter moon, 16 degrees of Gemini, 16 degrees of Pisces. So we have the moon separating from a conjunction with Jupiter. And it's on a fixed star. The moon is going to be on a fixed star called Rigel. And Rigel is generally associated with education, with like drinking from the fire hose of information. I have Venus on this fixed star, and I often feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose of information. I like have a lot of books that I like to reference and things like that. My joke for Rigel is from the movie UHF. This is sort of an 80s reference for those of you who are too young to remember this movie, but it's a movie with Weird Al Yankovic, who was trying to save a local independent broadcast station, you know, kind of your local, like, I don't know if PBS is the right word, but something like that. And Michael Richards has a show for children where he's like, there's like a big kiddie pool of oatmeal, and kids have to dive into the kiddie pool of oatmeal. It's sort of like Bozo the Clown. You remember this show if you're from like the Midwest, like the grand prize game, you know, he's like, you have to dive into this kiddie pool of oatmeal, and he's like, you found I don't know, like the pearl in the oatmeal or something. You get to drink from the fire hose. And he sits this kid on a hobby horse and like blasts him with a fire hose. And that's my experience of Rigel, is getting blasted by the fire hose of life and information. It's just like this, you know, this stream that comes. So I think that the first quarter moon, I think we're just going to get blasted by more streams of information. I know that it already feels like that's happening now, but I guess gird your loins for more of that. I would also say with that first quarter moon, we tend to have a little bit of a disconnect between contradictory needs, right? There's probably multiple things that need our attention, and some of them are rational, and some of them are emotional or irrational. And trying to figure out which of those is our priority might be difficult. So hang in there with the first quarter moon. First quarter moons generally are difficulty in manifestation. They are crisis of bringing something into being. So this could be the crisis of bringing a personal vision into being. Okay. So what I've done with Mercury ruled signs like Gemini, I allow myself to explore, and then I try to extract the meaning from it and the practical things that I can take action on, and then I discard the rest. Okay. And then if I need to gather more information, I'll gather it up, and then I'll discard, gather and discard, gather and discard. It's really important. It's a breathing process. It's something where you're trying to find the right information, but you don't necessarily need to keep all of it. That's the really important lesson, I think, in Geminis. You don't have to keep all of this in your head all the time. Focus on the actionable thing and then let go of the rest of it for the time being. You can always revisit the things that you've let go of. Lauren says, it snowed here. My son woke up early 2 days ago and wrote, Happy Valentine's Day in the snow in the field behind our home. It's still alive for all the neighbors to see. Oh, that is sweet, Lauren. That is nice. Um, it's a good thing you wrote that and not something worse. So it's good that you have trained him well, Lauren. Uh, it's funny. I just imagine like Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know if you're a Calvin and Hobbes fan, but Calvin used to go out and he'd make these like epic Wagnerian like operatic scenes with snowmen. I had a song about it where I was saying I have a song about Calvin and Hobbes, and uh, one of the lines in the song is uh, maybe a little later we can make some snowmen and question their impermanence. Like he would go out there and wax poetic about the transitoriness of life because of the snowmen melting and like facing their own, sun-inspired mortality. Uh, but yes, I like the message that your son put out there. Maybe a little better. Tracy is here. Says, hi, Spencer. The internet is playing up here too. I've been trying to tune in for about an hour, and now I'm on my phone, finally able to say hello. Hello from Sussex in the UK. Well, Tracy, thank you for stopping in, and thank you for your persistence. We had a little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning of the show, so I don't think you've missed too much here. We've been kind of trying to break down Pisces season, so I appreciate you stopping in today, friend. Okay, so that gets us through our first quarter moon. And I'm going to try to keep going at a reasonable pace here, friends. I'm not trying to ignore any comments. I just when we've got a month's worth of astrology to go, it is a marathon. Okay. So on the 8th of March, we have a trine between the Sun and Mars. So here is Sun-Mars trine. And this might be where and the moon is going to be activating the Sun-Mars trine on the 8th as well. I think this is a really interesting trine, and for a number of reasons. So usually Sun-Mars trines show us like, okay, here's an action that you can take, and here's an awareness of an action that you can take, and generally your conscious purpose that you're trying to manifest and your ability and your will to carry it out is in alignment, in harmony. So here we might be wanting to act upon a dream or defend our security around this period of time. Now, there is something that's very interesting about this particular Sun trine, though. Once the Sun has made its trine to Mars, then Mars will start to be making its aspect on one side of the Sun, and Saturn will be applying, well, it won't be applying, Saturn will be enclosing the Sun from the other side. Okay, the Sun will be applying to Saturn. This is called a malefic enclosure. And a malefic enclosure basically means that the two planets, Mars and Saturn, the two malefics, are hemming in a planet without any other planet interceding, like casting its ray. Sometimes it happens when two planets are on either side. Sometimes it happens when a planet like Mars is casting its ray on one side and the planet is on the other side, like Saturn is here. So what does this mean? This is a frustrating energy. Think about this planet being under siege. Okay, like besiegement was another word for a malefic enclosure. So let me get the right. Here we go. So the beginning of the malefic enclosure, March 8th. Besiegement, think about like if you want to talk about in like Lord of the Rings terms. I've been reading The Lord of the Rings, so this is sort of prominent on my mind right now. Like Helm's Deep, for example. Like when you're sort of making a stand at a stronghold, but you're hemmed in from all directions. And you've sort of got your back against the wall. This to me could be authority figures, the king literally being hemmed in on some level, Maybe some of our political leaders going through a very, very difficult time around this period of time. Maybe difficult for us to assert our own authority around this period. I would very much look at the Leo area of your chart personally if you're trying to figure out what this might mean for you, especially because the sun is the the host of that topic in your life. So you may be like in this very arbitrary Cancer rising chart, the sun is hemmed in the ninth house and is ruling the second. So like here's a process kind of example. Maybe you're having a crisis of faith, ninth house, or you're having a difficult experience of how you order your world through your spiritual viewpoint. Maybe you're just feeling very overwhelmed about, I don't know, capitalism, like which a lot of us are. Maybe you're like, I don't believe in capitalism anymore. And like, and that causes you to say, I'm going to stop spending money with large institutions that support toxic capitalism. And this could be a period of time where people just don't buy anything. If you're a Cancer rising, you say, you know what, I'm not going to spend any money because I don't believe in the system anymore. That's the ruler of your second house, like hemmed in due to the loss of faith in the system itself. That's one example, like, and I have seen some things where people are organizing buy nothing days, especially with big companies like Amazon or, I don't know, Tesla or any of those big companies, Meta, that are owned by the billionaire class. So that's one example of how a belief system can affect a different topic in your life. Now, that may present a challenge if you actually need something, right? If your second house ruler is hemmed in, you may have difficulty receiving something. Let's say another example. Let's take that example and put it aside for a second and say you are trying to receive something, second house, from a foreign place, but there is civil unrest in that foreign place that completely delays you receiving that shipment. You see what I'm saying? The sun is hemmed in the ninth house of a foreign place that makes it difficult for you to receive that which you have, I don't know, either ordered or that you're expecting, something that will support you. Could also be a legal issue, ninth house, that is affecting your resources. So these are just a number of manifestations to a malefic enclosure. Like I'll do one more for you just to show you how this could be a completely different example. So whoops, oh my goodness, that went too far ahead. So let's do, all right, well, we don't want to do Leo necessarily. How about Virgo? Okay. Let's do Virgo rising just for a second. So here the malefic enclosure would be in the 7th house, and it would be ruling the 12th. So there may be a challenge from a group that you're a part of that is affecting a partnership that you have, 7th house, that is making it very difficult for you to find peace or solitude, 12th house, which is Leo. It may also be the manifestation of a secret enemy or something of that nature. So you could see how you can flip the chart around, turn the wheel, and see how the connections are made. One of the beautiful things about ancient astrology, first of all, is being able to see things through the lens of whole sign houses, although there is some debate with various astrologers with this, but also the ability to truly understand the guest-host relationship about a planet that is trying to provide for another planet or another house or topic within the chart. So like here's one more example. Having a 6th house sun, for a Libra rising, is trying to provide resources for the 11th house of Leo, but it might be held in check by an authority figure, Mars in the 10th, and maybe a physical issue or a work issue, Saturn in the 6th. Okay. So maybe there's something where you're trying to come together with people, but you have a difficult relationship with a boss, or you're having a health issue that isn't allowing you to meet up with people. All sorts of things like that could be manifesting. All right, so the good news about that is that it's not going to last that long. The malefic enclosure of the sun goes from March the 8th until March the 12th. It's going to end with the Saturn Cazimi, so keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward. All right, so the 9th, just remember in America, we're going to spring forward an hour. The time change always, disrupts our rhythms. So there's no specific astrology on the 9th, but I thought it was important to mention, especially if you're running charts and things of that nature. So we're switching to daylight time and daylight savings time instead of standard time. Okay, now that gets us to the sun moving into Pisces 3. So I'm going to take this opportunity to take a little break and take a stretch here. So do me a huge favor, friends. If you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the newsletter, that would help you get 10% off any reading moving forward. Liking the video is a great way to improve the performance in the algorithm, to spread the word to more folks so that we can have new voices in the chat. If you'd like to make a donation via super chat or buy me a coffee, you can do that as well. Thank you so much for being here today, though. And again, thanks for your patience with some of the mercurial technical issues. You all are super troopers. I can feel the Mercury Pisces slowing down, muddling energy. It makes your brain foggy, It feels like you're trying to speak under 10 feet of water. So if I'm going a little slow today, or if I fudge a few details, part of it is probably Mercury. But we will hopefully be able to communicate our feelings, our meaning, even if sometimes the details aren't as completely accurate. One thing I think Mercury and Pisces can excel at is getting the point across, getting the deeper meaning across. And one thing I've learned about divination, which I consider astrology a form of, is that sometimes the symbols will speak in mysterious ways. And there's been times where I've done readings for people where I pulled up the wrong chart or the wrong hour, or I did AM instead of PM. We did an entire reading, and it was a good reading. That chart was speaking in that voice for that day. So I think that's always fascinating to see those things. And Jeffrey Cornelius was an excellent author that spoke about this in his beautiful book, The Moment of Astrology, how sometimes charts can be completely disconnected even from time and space and still have oracular meaning. Sorry, I just had to chew for a second. All right, so here we go. We're going to start talking about Pisces 3. Before we dive into the astrology of the middle part of the month, let's just talk about some of the themes, the overall themes. Pisces 3 shows us a figure or a family in the Ten of Cups standing under a rainbow. It's a very idealized vision. Book T calls it the Lord of Satiety. Book of Thoth calls it the Lord of Perfected Success. Austin Coppock, though, calls it a cup of blood, which is interesting, and I think probably a reference to the martial quality of this decan. We've talked a little bit about Pisces 3 in relationship to Mercury and Neptune in the North Node all conjoining at the beginning of the month. And the spirit in this decan is Elpis, which translates to hope. Again, we've had these wild swings of emotion potentially in this decan, and we may have to dig deep to find hope within this this dissolving energy that brings us in contact with, the both the tragedies of life and the beauties in life. So idealistic crusades are themes here. What are you willing to do or sacrifice to achieve your dream? Sacrificing everything for your vision. Emotional heights of agony and ecstasy. The manifestation of a dream. Sometimes it's the failure of a dream. That's one thing they don't talk about as much in Pisces 3. Yes, sometimes the vision becomes real, but sometimes the vision dies. So this is a very ephemeral place, like the rainbow. It's not a place of permanence. It's a place of here today, gone tomorrow. Pursuit of closure, the end of the rainbow, as we were talking about. Religious zealotry and fanaticism. This is an important concept to think about here. Is sometimes when we have a belief system, we want to pursue or defend it, where many people are willing to do whatever it takes. And we have to be really conscientious of that. Sometimes that sacrifice is necessary. Sometimes that sacrifice is extremely misguided. And really important to take into consideration with Neptune still present in Pisces 3 is we may be under the delusion that we need to sacrifice everything for a specific goal. We may not be seeing things clearly, and we may wake up from a bad dream or something of that nature when this transit ends. So questions you can ask yourself between March 10th and March 20th. Is this ideal worth sacrificing for? Some things in life are. There are some sacrifices that are noble. There are other that are just delusional and self-satisfying. How far are you willing to go to succeed? An important question. Which role are you playing, the martyr or the savior? That's where we can get confused sometimes, right? Where we think we're being the savior for a certain situation, but we're actually acting either as victim or martyr to the situation. I've talked to a lot of Pisces 3 natives with various planets in Pisces 3 that have had to make enormous sacrifices for situations or people in their life. Some of them were justified. Others of them were not necessary. And helping them to reclaim some of their lost power was an important part of our discussion. Can you temper the wild swings of emotion? This one is a decan and a sign that really talks a lot about dissolving the boundaries that separate us. When you don't have healthy boundaries, you can be tossed about like a feather on the ocean. When the tide is in, you are in. When the tide is out, you are out. When the wave is high, you're high. When the wave is low, you're low. So how do we center ourselves so that we're not just being sloshed about by whichever way the wind is blowing that day? Is this the happy ending or the tragic conclusion? Yeah, we're talking about Pisces 3. Not all of these endings are the vision that we see in the Ten of Cups. Sometimes coming to terms with things ending is important. And when we come to terms with the end of one vision, that helps inspire a new one that is more in alignment with who we actually are, what is actually possible, and what is best for the collective. And I mean that with like your family or your partnership or your community. Sometimes we have dreams that are narcissistic. And when we have a narcissistic dream, oftentimes those only succeed by hurting other people. So how do we identify the ones that are self-serving and then release them and then make a new dream that is more in service of a collective ideal? And then finally, how can you maintain hope in the face of change? This is a a mutable sign and a very mutable decan in a mutable sign. Lots of changes before the spring equinox, the new start. And everything in Pisces season is kind of melting in the northern hemisphere. The ice is melting, the snow is melting. Everything is just a primordial soup, a mixture of water and earth, but it's fertile, right? So if we understand that process of dissolving has to happen for future fertility, then we can ride the waves of change without holding on too tightly. Heather says, I have part of fortune in Pisces 3 in the 9th house. Can I ask a quick off-topic astro question? Do you use daytime formula for part of fortune? For night charts with both luminaries under the horizon, some ancients advocate this. Well, let me look. Let's see. I use the setting I have on AstroGold says different day and night. So it's not fixed. It's a different formula for a night chart than for a day chart. So I don't use the daytime formula for part of fortune in night charts. I would use the nighttime formula. And I believe that formula is the distance between the sun and the moon projected from the ascendant. Okay, so like in this chart, you'd take the distance between the sun and the moon, and you'd move that angle all the way to the ascendant and project it out. Now for a night chart, it would be the reverse, the distance between the moon and the sun, and project that out from the ascendant. So I think that's what your question was, but hopefully I've answered it satisfactorily. Okay. So now that we've got a big picture kind of focal point for the sun, a big spotlight on this Pisces 3 energy, what's going to be happening? Well, this is where we start our void of course moons. So this is already a very ephemeral, ethereal, somewhat confusing, idealistic place. But then we're going to start off this with the moon being void of course. So the moon's going to be void of course from 13 degrees of Leo, right at the start here. So here's what this means. So you can see it in action. I'll do a little teaching here for you. I'm not doing a little teaching, I'm just teaching all the time. But so you could see that the sextile that the moon makes with Jupiter is the last aspect that moon is going to make to any traditional planet over the course of 30 degrees. And the next aspect it's going to make is a square to that same planet. This is something I've noticed with these Hellenistic void of courses is you'll usually see one aspect to the same planet repeat. So like you get the trine to Jupiter, and then it's void all the way to the square to Jupiter. And that might actually just be how it is. It's just something I was noticing. So what do you do during these void of course moons? As little as possible, as little of importance as possible. I think that this is the time when you take a time out, you get a great book, you go off into an adventure in your mind, or you get rid of some stuff and clean your house. There are all sorts of ways to practice non-attachment. I think that's really the key with this is practicing non-attachment. And that could be non-attachment to physical reality. That could be non-attachment to the stuff in your house. It could be non-attachment to specific outcomes. I think if you have specific outcomes that you're trying to achieve during the void of course moons, that's when you end up running into problems. So this is going to be a test. This month is going to be a test of surrender. This decan is a test of surrender, of saying, how can I just surrender to the currents of my life rather than trying to assert my own will upon it? And that is a very difficult thing to do because we all have desires, we all have needs, and that's not a natural state of mind unless you've been meditating in an ashram for a long period of time or something of that nature. It takes practice. Lauren says, Neptune is here in Pisces 3. My kids made our living room into an island wonderland. Those kind of lock chain blue construction paper garlands going down into a waterfall. We're having a Moana 2 screening tonight for Valentine's Day. Well, Lauren, that sounds wonderful. That sounds like a very idealistic Neptune sort of manifestation. So, yeah, I think that there is some beauty to Neptune transits, an ability to dissolve the differences between us. Yeah, I think it's a beautiful manifestation, Lauren. All right, so we get to the 11th, and here we have Mercury conjoining Venus. So this is about 8 degrees of Aries. We have Venus retrograde. We have Mercury still direct, but about to go under the beams of the sun. And then we are right in the midst of a Saturn cazimi. So let's talk first about the Venus-Mercury conjunction, and then we'll also start breaking down this conjunction with the Sun and Saturn. So Mercury conjunct Venus retrograde. Mercury is a planet that questions. Venus is a planet that generally harmonizes. So we may be having questions or discussions or communications about how to harmonize from either with ourselves or to be able to harmonize through getting our own needs met. I think this is probably the time where we have important discussions about how we get our individual needs met within relationships, and whether that's relationships with our partners, our families, our communities, or with society. Like, how do we get our needs met with society? And oftentimes, Aries 1 tends to say, this is what I am not, right? Instead of saying, this is who I am, which is generally Aries 2, second decan of Aries. First decan of Aries says, I'm definitely not this, so I'm going to go off on my own, and I'm going to, try to assert my own will over here, right? Says, I'm going to reject all of this. It's a very, very martial decan. So I guess my advice for this aspect would be careful about conversations that you have where you're asserting your own will. You can advocate for your own needs without necessarily running roughshod or completely rejecting other people's needs. Okay. That's the real interesting thing about like Aries transits or individualism, is that everyone else has a right to their own individualism as well. And sometimes those things can clash, right? And that's when we have conflicts. So how do you assert your independence and your own needs in a way that doesn't step on the independence and needs of someone else? That takes compromise. So that's even when we have these Aries placements, it's not about necessarily completely bowling over everyone else to get your own needs met. You're still going to need to have compromise, because you truly aren't respecting your own sovereignty and the sovereignty of others when you are demanding that your needs be met at the expense of other people's needs. So something to consider with this. But I do think that there is probably a lot of conversations in relationships about how do we take ourselves into the equation rather than continuing to sacrifice everything for the other person. Now, let's move that forward to the Saturn cazimi. One other little detail about that Mercury-Venus conjunction. That happens in the midst of that Sun in malefic enclosure. I do think that that's going to be a pretty difficult stretch of time, the 8th through the 12th. We're going to have we still haven't experienced the Mercury malefic enclosure, which is starting on the 23rd through like the 25th of February as I'm recording this. So I want you to pay special attention at the end of this month, February, if you're listening to this earlier in the cycle. There may be some of the themes that repeat because Mercury is going to go through and raise a lot of questions, and then the sun will have a big spotlight on those same issues. We may feel very stuck within that. Now, the good news is that the Saturn cazimi ends the malefic enclosure of the sun. I think this is a really important aspect that I don't necessarily see talked about enough. This is a whole new Saturn synodic cycle, one where we are probably having our final Saturn cazimi, if I'm not mistaken, in the Pisces cycle. Okay, and this is a period of time where we are understanding the sacrifices that we are going to be bound to. Saturn has a binding quality. It says, here's your responsibilities. Here are the things that you're going to have to do that are hard. This day is probably going to say, here are the sacrifices that you are going to need to make if you want to achieve this particular dream. And how do you create structure around that? How do you create... Saturn is making an appearance today. So as I'm recording this, there is an insect that cazimi'd itself in my office lamp. And I have this big solar gold lamp that is in the corner, and it gets very hot, and a lot of the stink bugs in my house will be drawn towards the light. And one of those bugs, as I started talking about this, has merged with the light, and the smell is awful. Saturn is associated with bad smells. So hold on a second. I'm going to take a minute and blow this bug off of there just so that I can breathe. And we're back. So I love it when you get little winks from the universe like that. when you're talking about an issue and it literally starts to give you a symbol of its meaning. So if we break that down, we could say, hey, there might be something that doesn't necessarily smell very good, right? There may be something that is not super palpable that happens during a Saturn cazimi. But the good news is that it helps us understand the new way that we need to structure our lives. Saturn, when it's under the beams of the sun, is having the structures that keep us in alignment with one another. It starts to dissolve those structures. And when we get the cazimi, we get a new download, a new awareness of what our next assignments are going to be. They're not always fun. They're not always fun assignments. They're very harrowing and sobering sometimes. Now, in Pisces 3, again, the assignment probably has something to do with how do you maintain hope within a challenging situation? What sacrifices do you need to make to achieve your dream? And what are you willing to give up to do it? Now, when we get to the 13th, Venus retrogrades under the beams of the sun. So here we have Venus at about 7 degrees of Aries, and it is separated from the sun by about 15 degrees. So here we have the phasis moment. So in the greater story of Venus retrograde, this is probably an omen that speaks fairly loudly. This is where Venus is going under the beams of the sun to begin to be renewed, just like Saturn does. And isn't it fascinating to me that we have a cazimi of Saturn, and then it hands directly over to Venus starting her own cazimi process. So I do think that one of the things that we'll probably be seeing with Venus and Aries, I think that like things that are supporting women's rights, things of that nature. Um, I have a feeling that this current administration in America is going to try to strip some of those rights, and that's not going to go over well, nor should it. So there's probably going to be some speaking out about how do we maintain our independence and our sovereignty and things of that nature. But there may be a period of time where some of those structures dissolve first and then need to be reborn in another form or something of that nature. So this is Venus going under the beams of the sun as an evening star, starting her transition to becoming the morning star. So Venus as an evening star generally is more conciliatory, passive, harmonizing. Venus as a morning star, when it rises above the sun, on this side of the sun, is the warrior Venus. So this is a Venus that says, hey, we're not going to take this shit anymore. We're done with it, you know? And I think that that's pretty fascinating to see, especially when it's doing that in Aries. All right. That brings us to our full moon lunar eclipse. So here is March 14th, full moon lunar eclipse at 23 degrees of Virgo. Got the sun at 23 degrees of Pisces, separating from the cazimi with Saturn. Venus has just gone under the beams of the sun. Mercury is getting very, very close to stationing retrograde the day after the eclipse. This is a K2 eclipse, a south node eclipse. So K2 is the severed body of a dragon or a demon, and it's going to be swallowing up the moon there. Okay. This is K2 acts like a drain. It acts like a decreasing agent. So I do think that there's probably going to be a feeling of letting go, a feeling of release. We've talked earlier about what the South Node in Virgo 3 might mean. Some of it is legacy, our attachment to passing something on, the realization potentially that all those sandcastles fade into the sea, right? Eventually. That the things we are trying to preserve are so ephemeral. And the things that we thought were solid might not be. I think that this is probably one of the main themes at this eclipse is what we thought was organized is not necessarily going to be moving forward. And some of that is a manifestation of the air age itself, a decentralization of systems, forces, governments, etc. Sometimes that change is good. Sometimes it hurts people. So we'll have to see how it continues to play out to see which manifestation we're going to get. Now, a couple details about the eclipse. You've got the moon hosted by Mercury that is stationing retrograde. So a fierce connection to independence, but reviewing how we create independence, reviewing how we talk about sovereignty. I think all of these questions that we have with Aries, this was one of the things I was thinking about. I was doing a lot of meditating on Neptune's movement into Aries. I think both the Venus and the Mercury retrogrades that precede Neptune moving into Aries and eventually Saturn moving into Aries, I think we're going to be questioning what it means to be strong, what it means to be a leader, what it means to be angry, aggressive. And I think with Neptune moving into that sign, we may start to glamorize as a collective. I'm not even sure that I'm speaking even to just the people in our, who listen to these broadcasts, but just talking on more general terms. The collective may start to glamorize radical independence, might start to glamorize, the sort of Wild West cowboy experience that we've already glamorized to a degree in America. There are disputes over territory during those periods of time. And yes, there are conflicts and wars during those periods of time generally. What does it mean to be yang or quote unquote masculine or things of that nature? These are questions I've often asked myself as, being a man in America who is somewhat sensitive, and doesn't quite fit into the traditional archetype of masculinity, I guess. And so what does that mean for us moving forward? I think part of what I came to is that independence, excessive yang, it's an illusion. None of us are truly independent. We're all interconnected. I think that's where I came down on the side of after my reflections. Like, there will be this glamorization of strong, toxic masculinity that is coming. Unfortunately, it's already coming. But I do think that glamorizing conflict, glamorizing, the individual over the needs of the collective is a mistake that we will eventually have to wake up from, right? This is what I was reading a lot of Liz Green things, and I'll get to this when I talk about Neptune more specifically, but it's almost like a mass delusion that we have to wake up from after the cycle is nearing its end. And it's very sobering at the end of these Neptune cycles. So this particular full moon eclipse, co-present with Neptune, the sun's on the north node, Saturn is co-present with the sun, and the moon is hanging out with the south node. Now, the host of the sun is Jupiter, right? Jupiter in Gemini. So this feeling of just overwhelm, too much information, too many pathways, probably is going to be part of this as well. The first aspect that this makes is a trine to Jupiter, like the first traditional aspect, and it's on a fixed star at 13 degrees of Libra. The moon will be called Algorab. So Algorab was the crow that was tasked. This is really fascinating to me from a fixed star perspective, because I want to show you this. So I'll show you the outer realm here. Uh-oh, what happened? Well, let's go back. Okay. We'll just do one chart. So the long and the short of it is that Corvus the Crow is a constellation that is sitting on the back of Hydra, the sea serpent, and Crater, the cup of Apollo, is sitting right next to both of those constellations in the sky. And the story goes is that Apollo gave Corvus the Crow a mission to fill the sacred cup. And Corvus got distracted by the shiny delights of being incarnated, like the shiny, trinkets or toys. And he failed to achieve that sacred mission. And instead of taking responsibility for that, he ended up blaming the sea serpent, Hydra, right? He ended up shifting blame. There are two fixed stars that are really speaking towards this. 23 degrees Virgo is Alkes, which is in the constellation Crater, the cup, the sacred mission, the legacy that we have to pass on, the feeling like we have a sense of purpose that we have to move towards. And then we have the moon making its first aspect at 13 degrees of Libra, which is Algorab, the Corvus, the distracted crow. So one way that this eclipse could play out is that we feel like we have some kind of purpose, divine mission, legacy that we want to pass on. But that mission and legacy, that order, starts to get swallowed up by the South Node. And maybe due to distractions. Okay. One thing I will say too, Virgo 3 is associated with the 10 of Pentacles, which is a wealth card in the tarot. It's one of the it's the Malkuth card in the earth signs, right? It's the manifestation of all the hard work. And one reflection that's just kind of coming to me now is that it may be that much of our wealth is going down the drain due to a distraction, right? One of the things that I think about with everything that's going on in America right now is many of the culture wars that people are doing, or many of the hot button cultural issues that are pitting people against each other, are actually just a huge distraction to make people fight with one another, so that the oligarch class can just start to dismantle the United States government and consolidate taxpayer money. So it's very fascinating to me to see a wealth planet or a wealth decan on the South Node, the drain, and an aspect from the moon that's associated with distraction. So I guess what I will say is try not to be distracted by the issues that will divide the masses, because you'll need to kind of figure out a way to come together to fight the real battle, which is a class war, not a culture war. So those are my thoughts on the full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo 3. And we will break this down in a live stream in its entirety. So moving forward, we have Mercury stationing retrograde, going under the beams, actually not stationing retrograde, just going under the beams first, on the 14th, and then stationing retrograde on the 15th. Okay, so generally those planets like Mercury will go under the beams before they station retrograde. So that's important for a number of reasons. When the planet goes under the beams, there tends to be messages that we get, or when it emerges from under the beams. It works both ways. That was called a moment of phasis. And a moment of phasis is an omen that speaks. This is something I learned from Project Hindsight and Robert Schmidt. So this is an omen that speaks very loudly. So there may be some kind of message to pay attention to before Mercury stations retrograde around the eclipse. And that's not a provocative statement. Generally, when we have full moons, something is revealed to us, right? Something that is infused into a body. And so there might be something very important that is revealed, especially with commerce, etc., with Mercury being involved. So here is a few dates to consider for the Mercury retrograde cycle. So here's Mercury retrograde on the 15th. So it goes under the beams on the 14th at 9 degrees of Aries. It stations retrograde on the 15th at 9 degrees of Aries. And then it is Cazimi of the Sun on the 24th of March. And then it retrogrades back into Pisces on the 29th. It will emerge as the morning star at 27 degrees of Pisces on April 1st. And then station direct at 26 degrees of Pisces on April the 7th. I love the handing over that happens with Mercury stationing direct and Mars moving back in bounds. Okay? So as Mercury is stationing direct, Mars is finally back into doing things sort of normally, right? Not outside of the rule of law, etc. So that to me gives me a little bit of hope that will be a better moment for restoring some sanity potentially. We'll see. When we get to the 16th, we have another one of our void of course moons. And this void of course moon period is from the 16th to the 18th. So here we have a void of course moon with the moon squaring Mars, okay, to start at about 19 degrees of Libra, and then it will be void all the way until 19 degrees of Scorpio when it trines Mars. So here we've got let's trace it here. So here is the path that it's going to be void. So here's the square to start the void of course moon, and then it ends with the trine to Mars. See how it's utilizing the same planet? Okay. So again, we've broken down void of course moons, I think, to as much as we possibly can, but just to reiterate, generally things don't necessarily come to fruition that you are planning during this period of time. So it is a good period of time to release, to go in without expectations. And I would consider that there are going to be many different parts of your life that you may be trying to manifest in March that may have difficulty. That first void of course moon was between Leo and Virgo. So if you have something, the topic between Leo and Virgo in your chart, the two topics, in this random Sagittarius rising chart, 9th and 10th house, there may be something that isn't able to manifest in your public life. In this version of this Sagittarius rising chart, then you may have something where you're trying to manifest something within a group, but it's not necessarily the right time for it. So pay attention to the degrees that the moon is voiding, and understand that particular topic may be one that is a little bit frustrating on that day, or is a ripe opportunity for release. All right. On the 17th, we have the sun conjoining the North Node in Pisces 3. Whew, man. So that is St. Patrick's Day in America, a holiday that I don't really celebrate besides just eating some good food generally. But it tends to be a drinking holiday for many people in America. And a Sun North Node Neptune conjunction on St. Patrick's Day seems to be a recipe for overdoing any type of substance. So I guess that would be my cautionary tale to practice. So I don't know if sobriety is the right word. I guess sobriety. I'm not a drinker, so I always practice sobriety. But moderation, I guess, would be what I would suggest for this period of time. It may increase the sacrifice or the escapism. So when we have the Sun, Neptune, and the North Node coming together, we may be dissolving our sense of self through things like substances, etc., wanting to escape from a reality that is not necessarily the one that we had envisioned. So just be careful out there, friends, on March the 17th. Sergey is here. What's up, Sergey? Says, what a stellium in Pisces and Aries. Absolutely. Big stack up in those areas around this period of time, for sure, friend. So that was our Sun conjunct North Node on St. Patrick's Day. Again, increasing the North Node, decreasing the South Node, increasing all the themes that we were talking about with Pisces 3. Sacrifice, escapism, wild swings of emotion, but maybe a need for hope too. Maybe very much increasing our desire for creating something beautiful as well. We're going to have the conjunction of the Sun and Neptune on the 19th. Okay, so the culmination of that aspect. And then that brings us to the end of Pisces season. So Pisces season ends with a Neptune conjunction. And again, this is I guess you could call it sort of cazimi for Neptune. I'm not sure if that concept works with outer planets in the same way, but for the sake of our purposes here today, maybe the sun is infusing meaning, or being infused with meaning, if you could say, with the outer planets potentially. Maybe it works that way with those planets. But I think that this is definitely an awareness of sacrifice, an awareness of the boundaries that separate us, and the awareness of how we dissolve them. This is something that happens when we have, like, experiences like St. Patrick's Day. Sometimes people will turn to substances to help dissolve the boundaries between them, so that they can feel more comfortable around one another. And I'm not taking a green dump on that, like, but I do think, like, when you utilize things like substances to either dissolve a boundary or to escape reality, there's always a kickback or a consequence from that. I think that there's the day after, and this Sun conjunct Neptune could be that experience, the day after, the realization that comes, the hangover, where we might feel a lack of vitality. The sun is a source of vitality. The sun is the source of life. And when it conjoins Neptune, a planet that dissolves what it touches back into substance, like undifferentiated substance, we may have a dissolving of our will, vitality, of our light. So watch out for that around the Sun-Neptune conjunction period. Also notice that the moon is in Scorpio during that period of time too, which means our bodies might not be feeling very, very good around that period of time, since the moon is in its exile. But what I will tell you is I do enjoy some corned beef every once in a while, and Tanya makes a really good corned beef around this period of time, so pretty tasty. All right, so that brings us to our spring equinox and the sun in Aries 1. And let's move the chart over to that. And then we'll bring up the slides. Everything is taking longer. Do. All right, so here we've got, let's go back to Aries 1. There's the cards of Aries. This is from the Decans of Aries webinar that you can purchase at the store if you want to get a deep dive into Aries. But you see, we've changed over from cups to wands. And we have the 2, 3, and 4 of wands, cardinal fire. We are initiating something. We have the 2 of wands here associated with Aries 1. And this decan is called the Lord of Dominion. And there was a lot of literature about colonialism with this decan. And you see here, a lot of tarot scholars consider this figure to be a representation of Alexander the Great, who was trying to figure out which country he wanted to conquer next. He's holding the world in his hand. Which area do you want to conquer? Which dominion? This decan also is very, very martial. Like, it is a Mars-ruled sign, Aries. It is a Mars-ruled decan. It is about severing away from that collective. Pisces tended to dissolve the boundaries between us. Well, this is where we come up for air after swimming underwater in the collective spiritual waters for a period of time. It says, okay, I don't necessarily want to get consumed by this homogenization, right? So severing the umbilical cord, being born and released from an amniotic sea. This is how we are born. We're born from water. We're born, gestating in an oceanic sea. Think about Pisces in that way. Maybe our sense of purpose is gestating in the womb, in Pisces season, and then when Aries comes, it's like a slap in the face. You have these labor pains, and you're breathing in air for the first time. Your eyes open, and you're blinded by light. You're crying because it's just so shocking, and like, oh my gosh, it's just so much. That could be an experience of the transition into Aries on some level. Chokhmah and Atziluth, the flash of inspirational insight. There's also, when we're being born, this whole new experience, right? Maybe we see our mother's face for the first time, or we are taking in things with our senses through the gift of life. So there's some beautiful things with that birthing experience too. Splitting of the one, cellular mitosis. That's interesting to me because we had the oneness that we had in Pisces, but now we're splitting off into an individuation experience. It takes raw yang, undiluted yang, raw force to separate. It takes raw force for that seed to emerge from the mycelial network of dirt underneath the ground to individuate into an individual plant or into an individual mushroom. I like mycelial networks as a metaphor for the human experience, because even though we're experiencing these individual manifestations as mushrooms, we're all connected in mycelial networks, with each other, with maybe spiritually, physically, psychically, etc. And just the fact that we are individual mushrooms is an illusion. We're connected by mycelial networks. But sometimes you do have to come above the ground to spread your spores, and that's what Aries is in that metaphor. The sperm breaking through the wall of the ovum, right, to create life. The bursting of the seed husk above ground or whatnot. So questions to ask yourself in Aries 1. How can you individuate? What is not you? What is? How can you break new ground? How can you utilize that pioneering spirit to break new ground? Where is brute force necessary? And where is it excessive? These are going to be important questions to ask as Neptune changes into the sign and when Saturn moves into this sign, because brute force may be glamorized to the point of illusion. All right. And then Saturn is going to make that brute force very real. The other thing Saturn and Neptune do in this decan is they give you a terrifying vision of power. This is quoting directly from Austin Coppock's 36 Faces. A terrible vision of power and authority. Or even maybe glamorizing an authority figure to make them all powerful, which is frightening in and of itself. What new territory do you want to conquer? Well, that's a good question when we think about that from a social perspective, but also from an individual perspective. The new territory that the American regime wants to conquer is Canada and Greenland, much to the chagrin of peace-loving Americans, which are at least 50% of us. So it's frustrating to see the war drums and the Manifest Destiny drums being beaten and rung again. But at an individual level, where do you want to make a new start? Where is there something where you can kind of expand your awareness into what you want to do in your life and take a risk? There is risk involved with that. It's okay to take new starts. It's okay to take risks every once in a while. Sometimes they're necessary so that we don't get completely stuck in an old way of being or doing. And then finally, what new beginning is worth fighting for? Sometimes you have to utilize a lot of, energy towards a new start. That gets us out of the concept of inertia, right? When we have the concept of inertia, we are stuck. And Aries energy gets us unstuck. And sometimes that's 100% necessary. If we get too stuck in our ways, that leads to entropy and growth doesn't happen anymore. So how do we get ourselves unstuck? A question to ask. All right, so back to our chart. So we start off this Aries ingress. We've got Venus retrograde, we've got Mercury retrograde, we've got the host of all of these planets in its fall in Cancer. So a weakened Mars hosting these planets in Aries. So a lot of our focus may be on severing and separating from excess and the scarcity that might also affect for other people. So Cancer 3, where Mars is hosting all of these Aries planets, helps you have an awareness of when you consolidate resources, someone else is kind of suffering from it. So sometimes there's an awareness of when you take from one and give to another, you're creating this imbalance. So we're probably going to be having a lot of focal points on, where are we cutting and where is that creating surplus for those who, I don't know. I'm having a lot of trouble contextualizing all of this outside of the ridiculous wealth grab that we're seeing by the oligarch class. I don't know how many ways I can say it, but it's really frustrating, friends. Like, I'm angry about it. If I'm being 100% honest with you, like, I'm very angry and very sad and very disappointed. And I don't necessarily see all of that getting better into March. I think that the rise of technocratic fascism and the kleptocracy is going to continue to happen through March. I think that there's a potential relief in April, but I don't know. It has been a lot to process, I will say. The beginning of Aries 2, or Aries 1, starts with the last quarter moon. And this last quarter moon, we see the sun in Aries beginning to square on the 22nd, beginning to square from Capricorn. So here is the last quarter moon. Last quarter moons generally are existential crises, right? They are a changing of mind, a release of some sort. And here we have the sun in its exaltation, like this desire to be an individual point of light, consciousness, etc., to individuate. But we have the moon in its exile. The moon in a place where the resources that we would normally enjoy with the moon in Cancer, nurturing, mothering, etc., find difficult territory in Capricorn, where the resources might be lacking. Now, if we look at this decanically, the first decan of Capricorn tends to be related to contemplating the pros and cons of a specific place. So we may be really kind of thinking about where we want to make a new start in a new place. Like if we're thinking about moving homes, moving, territories that we're living in, etc. There could be a lot of reflection with that. I think it's not necessarily a time to act, though. This is a time period with the Aries ingress, the spring equinox, where we usually want to get moving. I think that this is a season, though, where every astrological marker says, take your time. Mars isn't in a great spot. Venus and Mercury are retrograde, and especially we're going to be starting off the season with kind of a waning moon, so it's not quite time to leap yet. Sergey says, I looked at the Sibley transits and progressions, and it didn't look like there was relief until after the midterms. You very well could be correct, Sergey. And we'll see. I hope we can survive with our union intact until then, my friend. Lauren says, Mars in Cancer with the Sun in Aries. On the positive side, perhaps the beginning of many new families. A little bit of a baby boom happening 10 or so months from now. Yeah. I'm not sure how positive that is, but I think that could be a possibility. I tend to fall on the side of we've already got kind of too many people on the earth already. And the whole birther, quote unquote, birther movement that has been put out there by some people in power is concerning to me, because I feel like there's already a difficulty with resources for the people that we do have. And they're taking away people's health care, like abortion rights and potentially even like birth control and things of that nature. So there might be births happening, but it might be because of people's rights being taken away, and I think that would be really unfortunate. As far as just like the beginning of spring, though, I think that definitely could be something that we'll see. Maybe there's more rabbits in the yard or something like that from a positive manifestation. So let's continue on. We get to the 24th. That's where our Mercury Cazimi happens. So here's our Mercury Cazimi at 4 degrees of Aries. And this is a renewal for Mercury. This is Mercury in the heart of the sun, being renewed, burning away the dross, an understanding of who we are as individuals, how we assert ourselves, what we might need to do to separate from the collective, what we might need to do to make our own way, make our own pathway. So the other thing to consider with this is to take that Mercury and look at your Virgo and Gemini houses to see where you might be experiencing a renewal, where we have Mercury kind of trying to play host to those two planets, or two signs, excuse me. And it may also have an effect on our Jupiter significations, because Jupiter is being hosted by Mercury in Gemini as well. So think about how you're expanding your knowledge base. Maybe you're going off in a new direction. Maybe you're getting a download of new information about how to become an individual, how to take new risks, etc. I don't necessarily think it's the time to act on all of those potentially. I think it's potentially a time to figure out what it is you need to be happy, but the time for action is not necessarily during that Cazimi. It's a time for awareness. So that's the 24th. And then we get another VOC moon. The VOC moons just keep on coming, don't they? So once you've gotten that download from Mercury, then it's time to just clean your house again. It's time to just let go of more crap and release any expectations of getting anything done for the next few days. So the 25th through the 27th, we've got the moon void of course. It's going to be void of course from 15 degrees of Aquarius to 15 degrees of Pisces. So it's going to square Jupiter. Okay, you can see here, we've got the square, excuse me, it's going to trine Jupiter first, and then it is going to square Jupiter. So it trines from 15 degrees of Aquarius, and then it's void for 2 days or so, and then it's going to be squaring Jupiter from Pisces. So yes, Winter says spring cleaning time. Absolutely. Right? Or spring cleaning. Yeah, I think that, again, this is an excellent, excellent month to just get rid of anything that has been cluttering up your space, cluttering up your mind. I think it's not just about physical decluttering. I think it's about getting rid of illusions, getting rid of false hopes, getting rid of dreams that aren't based on anything real, you know? Coming to terms with the reality of the moment that we're living in can be extraordinarily liberating. So, how do we release our illusions? Like, one of the things that I'm coming to terms with as a Neptune Sagittarian is releasing attachment to beliefs that I had as a child. Like, one of the things that I will say about growing up in this country, there was there is an enormous amount of United States centric propaganda that is fed to you from a very young age, and it's very like insular, insular, like where it like we're the good guys, and we're the people that are going to be helping everyone else and taking care of everyone else, etc. And the propaganda also machine said that, everyone is created equal and everyone in this country has an equal opportunity. And that's kind of the disillusionment I'm coming to at this point. The belief system that that is actually true, or that that is possible within the current system as it is created. And also coming to terms with the fact that, hey, we might not be the good guys, like, and this has been a lifelong process. This isn't, I didn't just wake up yesterday and be like, hey, you know what? America's doing some shitty things. Like, that's not the case. But it's an example of releasing a belief system in an illusion that we may hold on to too tightly. And these void of course moons are going to be great for that. They're great for coming to terms with things how they actually are rather than how you wish they might be. And that may be within your space too. How can you release expectations? How can you release the way the dream that you had that isn't working out the way that you thought? So Heather says, he who shall not be named has another transit of Uranus to his MC in mid-March. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. It's I like the way that you've contextualized that, Heather. So that is not the last VOC moon in March, though. March, there's one in the 30th, too. But let's keep going in the interest of time. So we get to the 27th. And here we have Mercury retrograding back into Pisces and conjoining Neptune. So this to me is actually potentially one of the nicer moments of the month. I know that we've had this, when I was reflecting on the astrology of March, I wasn't feeling too great about it. I was feeling kind of negative about it. And, I apologize if I've been too much of a Debbie Downer here today on the broadcast, but we're going through some tough times, and I think it's okay to acknowledge that. I don't want to spiritually bypass, the times that we're going through and pretend like it's okay when it's not, because it's not. We're not okay right now. I'm not okay right now as far as what's going on. But I do think that this moment with Venus retrograde in Pisces conjunct Neptune, maybe a small ephemeral piece of beauty. The first time that Venus conjoined Neptune, there were some really beautiful moments that happened that weekend. I had a nice experience with my dad. Like, I had a nice, we played this game together online. We hadn't really connected, spending enough time doing something together, and we connected playing this game that where you collect birds, and he's a big bird fan, and we go on bird hikes together, and it was just fun, like doing something fun with my dad. It wasn't a permanent thing. It was just a nice little moment. My partner found out that she's going to be an aunt around that period of time. Like her brother was is revealed that he and his partner are having a baby. So that was kind of a nice little like, wow. And that was in her third house. So there might be something like that that comes back around in March, around the Venus Neptune. I would advise you to enjoy that period of time without necessarily having to build your life around it. Remember, the rainbow is something that we don't uh, build our lives around. We enjoy its beauty for the time that it is there, right? It is a temporal thing, but it's not something where we're like, whoa, we saw a rainbow over in the east, so we're gonna build our home right here because that's where the rainbow is. And then you start building, and then the rainbow's gone the next day. You're like, oh shit, like, well, then you just keep trying to chase it, chasing rainbows. That's what I talk about, chasing rainbows. It's something that is impermanent, but that doesn't mean it's any less beautiful and that we can't enjoy it. All right, that brings us to our solar eclipse in Aries. So let's break this one down. So this is March 29th, and we have the moon, sun and the moon in Aries at 9 degrees of Aries. Chiron is there. Mercury is still retrograde at 0 degrees of Aries. This eclipse, we're going to have the eclipse, and then Mercury is going to immediately retrograde into Pisces the same day. So that to me is fairly fascinating. And Mercury is going to go into that same conjunction with Neptune that Venus just went through. So new moon solar eclipses are big chapter markers. These are really big like moments where we are starting something new. New moon eclipses in Aries, I mean, the energy of starting something big is very prominent. And it could be starting something that is more towards trying to get an individual's needs met rather than the collective needs met. And this could be true in our own lives too. There might be something where we're initiating something based on wherever that's happening in your own chart. Again, this eclipse is hosted by Mars in Cancer, a difficult place for Mars, but one that shows us the challenges of one person benefiting while taking from another. That's the language that we see, surplus versus scarcity within it. It also, Mars and Cancer just in general, talks about conflict within domestic situations or places where we would normally find security. So all of those things could be at play. You also notice that Mars is squared Chiron in this chart. So it's something painful potentially in this chart as well. Chiron being a asteroid that's associated with a wound that is very difficult to heal. A wound that we maybe try to heal in others, but we have difficulty healing within ourselves. In the third decan of Aries, this decan is related to trying to win over a hostile crowd through charisma. So maybe there's something where there's a charismatic expression or from a leader or something like that, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to convince people towards something good. There's been charismatic leaders in the past that have tried to convince people towards, mass destruction. So keep your eyes clear, I guess I would say. Then on the same day, we have Mercury retrograding into Pisces and conjoining Neptune. I think that when we have Mercury in Pisces, the messaging is not always clear. It's coming from an emotional place. So when we have Mercury retrograde conjoining Neptune, which is basically how we started the month. So we're going to end the month the way that we started it. Because time is a flat circle, so pay attention to the messages that you receive at the beginning of the month because they're about to come full circle at the end with the retrograde back into Pisces conjoining Neptune. And then two more things. The moon is VOC again. Void of course, Hellenistic void of course, again, on the 30th. Okay, this one happens between, 23 degrees of Aries and 23 degrees of Taurus. It is a square with Mars. So the moon squares Mars as it starts to separate from the eclipse, which if I'm, that one is kind of yucky because that's the first aspect that the moon is going to make when it comes out from under the beams of the sun. I don't generally like those. When a planet is making an aspect to a malefic planet, the unfolding tends to be slightly more painful. So this is the moon making its first aspect, squared Mars, becoming void of course, and then squaring, sextiling Mars from 23 degrees of Taurus, conjoining Uranus. So I do think that this eclipse is going to be spicy. I think that there will be a confusion afterwards, and then the moon conjoining Uranus, being some unexpected things happening, especially in regards to nature. This is what we see a lot with Uranus and Taurus 3 is humility in the face of nature and like climate induced kind of disasters and things of that nature. So I guess be very careful and have all your emergency plans intact and in place if you're affected by any of those types of things. And then our big ingress on the 30th is Neptune moving into Aries. So here is a few hours later at the end of the day, Neptune moving into Aries. Okay. Neptune in Aries. I've talked a lot about this so far, so I won't belabor this point, but Neptune is a planet that dissolves. Neptune is a planet that in the modern interpretations is aspirational, like as far as like dissolving the boundaries between us and the spiritual. So there's this kind of thought of it being this like redemption type of planet. Now, both of those things can be true. My personal experience with Neptune has been it dissolves form into formlessness. But it also can create a glamorization of wherever it is moving through. So what is Neptune glamorizing? What is Neptune dissolving? See, this is the dual nature of Neptune. Is it's both lifting something up, but then also releasing us from attachment to it. So when Neptune moves into Aries, a couple of things. Neptune in Pisces has been glamorizing the dissolving of boundaries, right? And it now we're starting to wake up from some of the challenges around that. I would say that the Neptune into Aries will start to glamorize Yang. So we glamorized Yin when it first moved into Pisces. Now we're glamorizing Yang forces, glamorizing aggressive individualism. I believe I heard a quote from one of the oligarchs that was talking about people who are on assistance programs being the quote-unquote parasitic class, which I found very distasteful. I think that the trend that I'm seeing at the end of Neptune in Pisces and moving into Aries is this return to you just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and like, you know, if you're not like strong or aggressive or whatever, then you don't have value, which I think is a real danger of Neptune in Aries, is toxic masculinity, this idealization of the warrior, right? Of being a warrior. Now, there can be some positive manifestations of that with the rise of authoritarianism and corporate oligarchy. There probably will need to be at some point a counter movement to be able to redistribute some of the resources that have been stolen from people. And that will take some courage. And I wanted to read to you a passage from Liz Green's book on Neptune, the astrological Neptune, and the quest for redemption. And this is talking specifically about the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, which is coming later on in the year. I'm going to see when, because this isn't just Neptune in Aries. This is Saturn, Neptune in Aries. So I want to go forward to this because we're building to this. And I will look at the date here for you. That's February the 20th of 2026. Okay. That's our Neptune Saturn. I know that seems far away, but this is we're getting pretty close to this seminal moment, this pivotal moment. And I'm going to read you this. It says, the configuration of Saturn and Neptune are celestial markers for those junctures in history when efforts are made, sometimes violent, sometimes peaceable, to make Eden incarnate. Aspects between the two planets are particularly relevant to the arts and to artists and are discussed in this context in Chapter 10. A general psychological interpretation of Saturn-Neptune in individual charts is given in Chapter 11. Something also needs to be said about the psychology of politics, which emerge when these two planets are involved with each other. Because Saturn symbolizes, amongst other things, our need both as individuals and as a collective to survive in the material world, it is by nature a defensive planet, geared not towards change or progress, but towards persevering those systems and structures which guarantee safety and the preservation of autonomy and authority. Saturn is deeply concerned with control, for control is our chief means of survival. If we can control ourselves, our bodies, our feelings, our environment, our relationships, our economy, and perhaps even our future, then we are not so vulnerable to the vicissitudes of life. At its best, Saturn is a healthy realist, tough, urbane, and self-sufficient, making the best of the world as it is, rather than dreaming of how it might be or might have once been. The strongly Saturnian individual or collective is usually well equipped to cope with whatever life brings because of a good adaptation to the demands of the present, and an inbuilt resistance to sentimentalism about the future or the past. At its worst, Saturn is a tyrant. And keep in mind, Saturn is in its fall in Aries, its most difficult position. At its worst, Saturn is a tyrant. The need to control overwhelms all other urges and creates absolute dictatorship, whether of an individual psyche or of a nation. The person who has identified too strongly with Saturn may attempt to deny or suppress every trace of dependency, vulnerability, or disorder. So too may a nation with a planet prominent. Let me repeat that. And this is because Saturn and Neptune are coming together in Aries, which idealizes rugged individualism and may idealize one specific figure as an authority figure. It says, the person who identifies too strongly with Saturn may attempt to deny or suppress every trace of dependency, vulnerability, or disorder. So too may a nation with the planet prominent. This is going to be in the Sibley chart of America's Cancer rising chart in the 10th house. So the 10th house generally represents its leadership. Liz Green continues. She continues. Neptune's longing is what renders us most dependent, vulnerable, and disorderly, and least equipped to cope with the stresses and strains of daily existence. Thus, the two planets, when in direct aspect, will engage in a profound, although often unconscious, struggle. Sometimes this results in great creative gifts and a remarkable capacity to make vision manifest. More often, it results in one or other of the fundamental principles the planet represents being forced underground and projected elsewhere. Saturn is then imprisoned by its own fear, doomed eternally to patrol the walls, wasting its gifts in a fruitless search for the subversive forces which it can never wholly stamp out. And Neptune is imprisoned by its own passivity, doomed eternally to play the persecuted victim, wasting its gifts in a fog of self-pity and vague apocalyptic dreams. The politics of Saturn-Neptune are often extreme, particularly with the conjunction and hard aspects. For whichever side they begin, left or right, They become curiously similar as they proceed to enact their archetypal roles. National Socialism or Socialist Nationalism, rose by any other name would smell as sweet. The redeemer of the downtrodden collective rises up to overthrow the persecutor and then becomes the new persecutor of a new downtrodden collective, which must then seek freedom from yet another redeemer. Whether the subversive scapegoat is the German nation after the First World War, or the German Jews, the Bolshevik Revolution under the Tsar, or the dissident intellectual under Stalin, Saturn-Neptune always requires a persecutor and a victim. There's a lot to unpack in those paragraphs from Liz Green. We have seen lots of othering, a persecutor and a persecuted. And I think that this Saturn-Neptune coming together as we are seeing Saturn moving into Aries. So let's just give you some dates with this. So the ingress of Saturn into Aries happens at first on May 24th of 2025. Okay. So it's going to start applying this aspect to Saturn and Neptune it's going to start applying on May 24th of 2025. It's not going to come together permanently until 2026 that I just showed you. So Neptune moves into Aries on the 30th. It stations retrograde on July the 4th. So think about the symbolism inherent within that. Neptune stations retrograde in Aries on July the 4th, the birth date of America, basically. Like, it will retrograde back into Pisces on October the 22nd, station direct on November the 10th at 29 degrees of Pisces, move back into Aries on the 26th of January of 2026, and then finally it'll be there for 14 years. It'll conjoin with Saturn early in 2026, I believe February, and then it's going to be hanging out in Aries until 2038. The historical facts of Neptune and Aries ingresses for this particular country were coinciding with the 1860s. That was the last time we had Neptune in Aries in America and Uranus in Gemini. 1860s, early 1860s was the American Civil War, which is a scary thought. And I'm not sure where we're heading as a nation right now, or as a collective, as a world. It wasn't just the civil unrest in America. There was civil unrest in a lot of different countries around the world around that period of time. But I do think that the glorification of might makes right, of just barreling over without listening, of manifest destiny, of those types of very toxic ideals, of colonialism, settler colonialism, of expansion of land rights, is very much a possibility as Neptune moves into Aries. And it makes me horrified and sad. As a person living here, as a person who values peace, as a person who values diversity, as a person who values the contribution of women and of people of diverse backgrounds, this is making me uncomfortable, the Neptune and Aries transit. We'll see what happens. We'll see how we adjust as a community. But I do think that oftentimes Neptune can give us a collective psychosis and a collective illusion that we are under. And at this point, the collective illusion may be like anger, violence, etc. The glorification of masculinity to the point of dominating everything and everyone around you. And I think that that's a mistake, because life has taught me that we are not islands of individuals. We are a collective. We are, every action has a reaction. Every community is built up of all sorts of different things. And this is something that nature teaches you as well. One species does not survive individually. They are dependent on other species, on other plants, on other animals, on other microbes, etc. And I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges of our time is how do we maintain our respect for one another when the tenor shifts, when the energy shifts, when we're under pressure to be these individuals without support from our collective system. You know, this is a thing that I get frustrated when I hear like people who are rugged individualists talk about, like, oh, I just did everything on my own and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's such a load of bullshit. It's such a load of BS. You know, like the whole like kind of libertarian type of mindset is so misguided. You know, like we're all trying to help one another be successful, or we've all benefited from collective actions. If you drive a car on a road, you've benefited from collective resources. You know, if you have benefited from drinking clean water today, yesterday, or whatever, you've benefited from someone who went to bat to protect a collective resource. Like, it's so mind-numbing to see like the forces of change moving towards a stripping of anything that is related to collective help to one another. And needing help doesn't make you weak. This is the biggest lie that I think Neptune and Aries might bring into our collective, is that if you need help, you're weak. It's garbage. Sometimes being able to admit weakness and admit that you need help is the strongest thing that you can do, and the most enlightened thing that you can do. And just because we are flawed does not necessarily mean that we don't have value. And this is something that we'll have to remember as we move through this Saturn and Neptune conjunction, is that just because you need help or that you're flawed or neurodivergent or different doesn't mean that you're any less than, and that you still have value, and that just as being an individual, right? And just as being a person. So the trends that I'm seeing are horrifying, and they need to be called out. What I hope is that we don't continue to normalize hate, anger, those two things in general, that we don't continue to normalize othering, casting people aside that need help. It's going to take a collective effort, and we're going to have to stay sober when those forces gain power. Rachel says, I'm reminded of a proverb which says something like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, travel together. I agree, 100%. Yeah, I think that that's important. You know, like Aries is a fast planet, or sign, I guess you could say. Aries is a fast sign. And it is something that is where we may be acting before we think it through. And I would encourage people to think it through beforehand. Rachel says, at some point we all experience our vulnerability as a human being. Yeah, it's called aging. Like, that's the thing. Like if you think it's okay to just cast people aside as they age out of quote unquote being useful, like that's part of the mindset that's happening right now that we need to figure out how to rally against. But I digress. So, friends, that's the astrology of March. We do have an I-Ching reading for you. And the I-Ching that we have is number 42, which translates to increase. So it also translates to benefit, increase, harvest, enrichment, generosity, sharing your bounty. It has one changing line. That changing line is in the 5th place. It says, if you are sincere and have kindness in your heart, you need not ask. Supreme good fortune. When there is sincerity, kindness is your power. So Jack Balkin in his I-Ching says, if you truly have a kind heart, you do not need to worry about whether you have done the right thing. Your generosity and sincere concern for the welfare of others means that whatever you will do will ultimately be for the best. People who are truly kind do not act in order to be rewarded for their good deeds. They are generous and kind because of their inner compulsion of their character. Nevertheless, others recognize their worth all the same, and their influence spreads widely. Hence, the text says that when you are sincere, kindness is your power. What you do out of the goodness of your heart and without thought of gain will nevertheless bring you influence and recognition. So this is, I think, a really good advice. It's saying that you may be confused about what you need to do now, what needs to happen, right? But if you are acting out of a place of kindness rather than a place of hatred, you don't necessarily need to worry about whether you're doing the right thing or not, because that force is going to move you towards the best possible outcomes. It's changing to hexagram number 27, which translates to nourishment. The jaws, bulging cheeks, nourishing others, being nourished. You are what you eat. I think this is a really important hexagram for moderating what we take in. In a time of confusion when it comes to what we're being told, and when we're witnessing censorship to what we have available to us to support a specific narrative, we need to be careful about what we take in and what types of nourishment we take in. So be very careful about how you take things in the future. But your kindness could lead to helping to nourish others. I guess that's the other point of this hexagram is if you fall back on your kindness and your sincerity, you will automatically be nourishing others, right? So that's our hexagram for the week, or for the month, I should say. Then we do have an animal as well. Our animal is a really nice balm to all of this energy that we're experiencing. It's the deer. The deer is a manifestation of gentleness, sensitivity, sacrifice. It teaches us to trust our instincts to guide us, to find a calm, peaceful path rather than the aggressive one. Deer is really good. When you look at relationships within animal systems, like think about someone like a mountain lion who hunts deer. Sometimes mountain lions can be overly aggressive, right? But the deer is a balancing energy because that's the food that it consumes. It is a balancing energy through gentleness, through sensitivity, through not necessarily insisting. Deer can help us find our ways by trusting our instincts. It's a very lunar animal as well. So I think it's an appropriate symbol for eclipse season. So how do we find that calm place, that peaceful path? How do we trust our instincts to guide us? These are questions to ask ourselves when we are looking at the month ahead. When we look over to April, we've got Mars moving into Leo, out of Cancer finally, out of bounds. Mercury and Venus are going to be stationing direct, and Should be interesting. I think there's a slightly more positive astrology in April than I saw in March, but there will be a Mars-Pluto opposition that we'll have to contend with, but there's always something to contend with. So that's what I've got for you today. Thank you all for hanging out. Thank you for your patience. And we'll try to get through this together. Appreciate all of you. Go over and follow me at Spencer Michaud on Instagram, Blue Sky, etc. And you can find me at spencermichaud.com. Hang in there, friends. We will see you the next time. Have a good one. Peace.